Hey guys, welcome back. So now with everything that's gone on throughout Dawn of X, I wanted to go back just a little bit and shine some light on what we had seen in some of the giant-sized X-Men one-shots that give us a look into some of the things that have been happening in the background. And in this case, more specifically, the haunted, abandoned X-Mansion. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping right in from us knowing from the time of House of X, when Xavier had made his announcement and the X-Men had planted a number of doors around the world as an invitation for mutants far and wide to make their way to Krakoa. And along with doing this, there have been precautions set so that only mutants can pass through, and ultimately when there are multiple failed attempts, that information is first picked up by Cypher, who at that point would determine how serious this threat is, and from there he would either give it to Sage, who would take it to X-Force, which would really only be the case if there was a need for the mission to be covert, which more specifically means if there's any political involvement, then that would be a task for X-Force to snuff the problem out quickly and keep Krakoa's name out of it. And in other cases, this is something that Cypher would hand over to one of the captains, and by doing so either directly or going through the Quiet Council, which in all cases he doesn't have to do because he sits on the Quiet Council, but with doing so he shares the seat with Krakoa, so it's not like he sits in a specific season. But if he chose to share it with the rest of the council, they would then likely send a captain, much like we had seen with the issues in the Savage Land, which stood high in priority with the chance of mutants either being missing or harmed. And in that case, the team delegated, they would just take it from there. But in this case, with Cypher noticing a number of attempts of mutants trying to make their way to Krakoa from the Xavier mansion, which has been deserted for a while now. But this was something that he saw needing investigation, but not necessarily to the point of where he'd send the cavalry, because this could be something, but then it could be nothing. So in order to check this out, he brought along Magic, who as we know is a great captain of Krakoa, which pretty much gives her the license to kill. And so if things do get a little too crazy, she can make that call in the field, and then later make her justifications to the council. But along with Magic, Cypher also brought Nightcrawler, who also sits on the council, and along with him, Lockheed and Eye-Boy. And really amongst this group, Eye-Boy is one that we haven't talked about, whose real name is Trevor Hawkins, but essentially his mutant power, aside from having eyes everywhere, is that he also has the ability to see in a number of different modes, giving him night vision, infrared vision, microscopic, telescopic, you name it. Like at one point he might have wanted the name Vision, but as we know, that name was taken. But when they get here to check it out, and once again seeing if this is something or if it's nothing, but with doing so, Eye-Boy takes the first look and he doesn't pick up anything, as if the place is deserted. But Lockheed on the other hand sniffs someone out who's trying to stay hidden, and he goes after them full speed, full flames ahead to kind of burn them out of hiding, but quickly Kurt has to go and stop him by bamfing ahead and keeping Lockheed from burning down the whole mansion. But with doing this, Kurt also gets a look at who Lockheed had seen, which appeared to be the original Warpath, John Proudstar, who at this point is like seeing a ghost, and with Eye-Boy and the others catching up after, only Kurt and Lockheed has seen him there. And with Eye-Boy who looks again, he still doesn't see a trace of who Lockheed and Kurt had claimed to see, which then at this point leaves Nightcrawler to do something pretty clever, because when he notices another figure moving throughout the mansion, like through the corner of his eye, he immediately bamps and chases the second figure down. And for a little while it does send him on a bit of a chase, but at the same time with him actually being able to see glimpses of a figure here and there, he quickly just jumps to that spot and from there to the next to try to chase this person down. And for the second figure, when he chases her down, they then discover what appears to be Rachel Summers, but in this case wearing her Hound outfit like we had talked about in Powers of 10, which also makes it pretty strange because at this point it is known that Rachel is living in the Summers house, which is located on the moon. And that really puts them in this position to where like finding out if this actually is Rachel, and if it is, then figuring out what exactly is wrong. Because this Rachel is not saying anything, and when they get closer to her, she just takes off, which gets even stranger when they discover that she's running for this doorway, which pretty much looks like it leads into the Upside Down. But with Kurt being not the only teleporter here, but definitely the quickest, he makes his way to get in front of her before she goes too far in, and it's here where we begin to discover who this really is. Because when she speaks in this strange language, which Cypher points out has some type of harmonic binary consistency, but also when making that observation, Cypher also notices that the walls are pulsating just before they pull him in. And at a first look, I know this really feels like everything here is just left field, but actually it's more like a deep cut making its way back into the Hickman run. But with Cypher getting sucked into the wall and this Rachel using that as an opportunity to get away, it's here where he comes into contact with the repurposed antimatter drive of alien origin, which kind of gives away the suspense of what's happening here, but at the same time, and what they're coming into contact with, it has been gone for so long, and I mean slightly hinted towards during Powers of 10, and aside from that a little bit of 2018, and before that like decades in between. But it's here where Cypher makes his attempt to communicate with his antimatter drive, where he compares this whole situation very much to a horror movie, and he's like, this is the part where you see something you're not supposed to touch and you go for it anyway, and people are yelling at the screen, don't do it, just before the monster sneaks up behind you. And it really does play out like that a little bit, because while Cypher's been pulled to the center of what's going on, you cut back to the rest of the group who's getting this like slow unfold of what's really happening. And at this point we discover what appeared to look like Rachel. It had actually been the combination of two things, which first is a species called the Sidri, which are hive-minded creatures that at one point were attempted to be weaponized by the Kree, much like we had recently seen with symbiotes back in Venom First Host. But in the case of the Sidri, to where this didn't work out with the Kree Empire, they were later used as a bounty hunting system near the Shi'ar Empire, and it was around this time when they were hired by Deathbird to go after the other bounty hunter, Corsair, who then was being chased by the Sidri and led them here to Earth, to where back at this time I think it was just Storm and Cyclops at the mansion, which is why there was only 3 of them to fight off this whole swarm. But when this had happened, we discovered that the Sidri had a number of capabilities, like they could come together and form different constructs, and they were highly durable, because lightning wouldn't affect them, Cyclops' optic blast wouldn't affect them, Corsair's blasters wasn't doing nothing, which is why he brought them to Earth. But eventually they did succeed at fighting them off, with Storm trapping them in what I think at the time was like a radioactive plant, and with doing so, Corsair just blew the whole thing up. And little did Corsair know, like, this is one of those things that could have went either way, because though it worked at the time, Corsair, he apparently hasn't read a lot of comic books, and because of that, I don't think he realized that radioactive explosions usually make things stronger. And come to think of it, like, it would be insane if Corsair had somehow at the time connected all this to Immortal Hulk. But we're not gonna go down that wormhole right now. But if you'd like to in the comments, I'd love to see those ideas. But as it turns out, and how all of this comes back to giant-sized X-Men in 2020, what we come to find out is that since then, the Sidri had been hiding and nesting within the X-Mansion. And with doing so, someone else has recently entered the mansion who was trying to make their way to Krakoa, but with doing so, they were caught by the Sidri, taken captive, and with them using their powers as a cry for help, it then got mixed in with the hive mind and scrambled within translation, with at its core being 2 different cries for help. Because on one hand you have this mysterious mutant who's trapped somewhere in here, but on the other you have this hive which feels threatened because of the mansion, which at this point they've completely made their home, is continually feeling threatened because someone's either trying to use these gates to get to Krakoa, or in this case now, others have made their way here to see what the disturbance was. But so what appears to be the body of Rachel collapses, and it turns into these Sidri creatures. It's then when Kurt's like, you know what, we're really not the right team to be handling this, because there's a lot of these things and they're clearly overwhelmed by them. But like I mentioned before, Magic, with her being one of the great captains of Krakoa, she pulls rank over Kirk in the field. But in this case, when it comes to them deciding what to do next, they're pretty much on the same page with deciding to find Cypher and get out of there. And when Magic makes the call that it's either going to be her or Kurt, Kurt agrees that she goes looking for Cypher while he stays there with Eye-Boy in case he needs to bamf him out of there. But when we get back to Cypher, who at one point it was looking like it was the end for this guy, like in a horror movie style fashion. But as it turns out, he's come to realize the whole situation of the Sidri and how that at this point in time, they're really just trying to make themselves a new home. And to better communicate with them, we see him then use Warlock, who's been on Cypher's arm for some time now, and not to mention Warlock is also alien himself. But with doing this is also here where Magic finally finds Cypher, but not long after she also discovers that Warlock is with them. And this is one of the things that we talked about like on the X-Men playlist, and more specifically in our talk about the Crucible, because since the beginning of Dawn of X, Cypher has been keeping Warlock a secret, with most people likely thinking that he's still dead, but actually he's been hiding with Cypher this whole time. And I'm not specifically sure why Cypher is keeping this a secret, whether it's because Warlock is alien, and how having him there may be some kind of conflict with Moira's past lifetimes, which could also be a thing. But all in all, Warlock also asks Magic to keep this secret, and when she asks why, she's only given the explanation like, you're doing this for a friend. So we still gotta wait and see what that answer is. But it's here where Cypher, with the help of Warlock, makes a deal with the Sidri. And the deal is pretty much that Cypher would handle the Sidri's problem, and in return the Sidri would just let Cypher and the others be on their way. And with making this deal, it immediately caused the Sidri to fall back from attacking Nightcrawler, Eye-Boy, and Lockheed, because as part of Cypher's agreement to handle the Sidri's problem, which Cypher had pieced together, it was coming from the mutant which they were holding, so all they really needed to do was get this mutant and get out of there. And as it turns out, this mystery mutant, air quotes, who had been trapped inside of the mansion, as it turned out, it was actually Lady Mastermind. And so now Lady Mastermind, who I also feels like needs a bit of a backstory. Because for Lady Mastermind, whose real name is Reagan Wingard, she's the daughter of the mutant once known as Mastermind, Jason Wingard, and she's actually more powerful than her father was, though the type of powers that she has is pretty much the same as his, with her having the ability to project very realistic illusions into the minds of others. But what's interesting to me about the choice of bringing her back here, and not so much in the sense like we haven't seen her recently, because I'm pretty sure she popped up in House of X when we initially seen a number of mutants make their way to Krakoa. So with us finding Lady Mastermind stuck here, it's not like it's her first arrival, but it comes off more so as an explanation to where she's been. But what I think is more interesting about seeing her being stuck in this position is the fact that knowing like in the past that her characters had issues specifically with the fear of dying alone, which likely for her made this whole situation 1,000 times worse. But after finding her here, Cypher and the others are able to take her back to Krakoa, but also in the time being they've made a pact with the Sidri that they could use the mansion as their nest and live there peacefully. Which is one of those things that kind of makes you have this feeling to like, okay, well how long is that gonna last? Especially when Corsair or even the rest of the Quiet Council finds out about it. And so real quick, I just want to give a shout out to all the Patreons. Shout out to MYN, Naked Potato, Sherwin H, Michael B, Rory L, T Fleming, and George MMA. Welcome to the Patreon squad and thank all of you for supporting the channel. But that'll do it for this one, guys. I gotta say, I'm curious to see how a lot of this pans out, with Sinister's teases about Warpath and the real Rachel who we'd seen in Excalibur that we'll see again soon in the new X Factor series, but also this secret of Warlock and how long that's gonna last. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.